This is the rule of thirds. You may have heard of this technique before. It's used in photography, video production, graphic design, painting, lots of other art forms. But what is it? Well, before we get into the details of the rule of thirds, I'd like to show you two images. Really, they're the same image, but one has been framed slightly differently. And I'd like you to look at both and think about which one is nicer, which one is more pleasing to the eye. Here's the first one. We've got three ice climbers making their way down from a treacherous climb, probably the summit. And here they are again in a slightly differently framed photograph. So which one do you think is nicer, more pleasing to the eye? Hopefully you decided that the second image was the nicer image. But why is it nicer? Well, it's using the rule of thirds. So let's take a look at what that is. The rule of thirds is an imaginary division of columns and rows over top of a photograph. If we imagine a photograph being divided into 3 equal columns and 3 equal rows horizontally, we end up with this tic-tac-toe-like grid over top, the dotted lines making those divisions. And the rule of thirds says that the most interesting places on a canvas or a photograph or a screen, the places that our eyes are drawn to, are on these horizontal and vertical lines, and even more so at the points of intersect, so where they cross. Now this is really interesting, and we can see it happening in a lot of TV and movies and photographs and posters and logos. So let's take a look at some. Here is a picture of a bird. Now we can imagine that grid laid over top. Where would the bird fall? Well, it would look something like this. And we can see that the bird falls directly on that right vertical line. The bird's body and its wing also follow the lower horizontal line, and the bird's face falls directly on that point of intersect in the top right corner. It's hit 3 of those hot spots using the rule of thirds. Makes this photo very nicely composed. Here's another picture. It's an elderly fellow standing outside in some dust. And we can see that it's really just a picture of his head and shoulders. And where are those imaginary lines? Well, they would look something like this. We can see that his head mostly follows that left vertical column, and his eyes and nose and mouth are centered nicely in that centermost box created by our 9 sections. So let's take a look at that climber image one more time so we can see the rule of thirds in action there. Okay, there's our picture, the one that we decided was nicest. And here it is with its rule of thirds laid over top. Now we can notice that the climbers don't fall directly on that line, but they're close enough to it that our eyes accept them as being in that zone. It's interesting that the line goes all the way from the bottom to the top, and so do the climbers. And it's even more interesting that each climber kind of falls into his own box created on our grid of 9. All these factors work together to make this an interesting photo. Now, of course, there are lots of other photography techniques like contrast and lighting and depth of field. And these are all tools that photographers use. And the rule of thirds is one of those tools, and it's a powerful one. So now your job is to go out and try it for yourself with your photography. Use the rule of thirds.